And joining us now, Benoit Pelletier, Quebec Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs, and we welcome you to TVO and the province of Ontario.
Thank you.
Nice to meet you, sir. Tell us, for starters, the relationship between Monsieur Charest, your Prime Minister, and Monsieur McGuinty, our Premier.
Yeah.
What's it like?
Well, it's very good. It's improving. It was good at the beginning, but it's even better today. For different reasons. I think that the relationship between the two provinces is better. The two premiers know each other better than before. They, at some point, I know that they have some common grounds. I think that Mr. McGuinty resembles a bit Mr. Charest, not physically speaking.
Their politics are similar?
Their politics and also their sensitivity about some questions, including environment. I know that they share the same sensitivity, the same preoccupation concerning environment, different questions that are facilitating the relationship between both.
I'll get a little snide comment here. They may share visions on the environment, but not enough to help Monsieur Dion, apparently. But I'll save that for later. I'm going to come back to that. Your party, the Quebec Liberal Party, and the Ontario Liberal Party, there have been many links over the past couple of years or so. You've had joint cabinet meetings, and you've done a number of events together. How does this help the average citizen?
Well, I think that it helps the citizens in a way because it will help eventually the economy. What we are going to get is I would say, a closer economic and commercial relationship between the two provinces. And all the citizens will benefit from that. If we get the agreement, that agreement that we are looking for between Ontario and Quebec in terms of economy and commerce, we will get the fourth biggest market in North America.
Are you looking for a kind of a free trade market for Quebec
Yes,
and Ontario?
Exactly. That is what we are looking for. And even more than a free trade market. We want to have an economic relationship, not just eliminating barriers between the two provinces.
I know, because you are the Minister for Intergovernmental Affairs, that you have heard, possibly ad nauseum, about the Premier of Ontario's quest to have what he thinks is a fairer deal for the province of Ontario, the fiscal imbalance he talks about, the notion that Ontario sends $20 billion to Ottawa more than it gets back in services from the feds. And I want to read something Jeffrey Simpson wrote in the Globe and Mail and then get you to comment. Mr. Harper, the Prime Minister, as is his wont, says Mr. Simpson, plays with slippery language in Quebec, often using the word autonomy. Of course, he reminds everyone that he got past the resolution describing the Québécois as a nation within Canada. And he brags about having solved the fiscal imbalance. The whole fiscal imbalance was an invention that became a mythology in Quebec. Big, bad, fat Ottawa was rolling in dough, while the poor, beleaguered provinces had too little. We have solved the fiscal imbalance, Mr. Harper proclaimed, and Jeffrey Simpson says, nice try. How do you respond to his view that the fiscal imbalance, at least he held it here, is a myth?
Well, I don't think it is a myth, and I still think that it does exist, at least partially. We have solved a part of it. What is fiscal imbalance? It's a gap between the revenues of the federal government and the revenues of the provinces compared to their constitutional obligations. So if you only look at the revenues, you only have one side, one dimension of the whole figure. You have to look at the revenues and the constitutional obligations.
So in other words, the provinces have a lot of responsibilities and not so much money. The feds have all the money and not so much responsibility.
Exactly.
Okay.
In particular, healthcare in each province, education are very costly jurisdictions that the provinces are responsible for. So that gap still exists. It had been solved partially. But let me tell you this, what had been done by the Harper government was modifying the equalization payments, the equalization formula. And I remember that Mr. McGuinty had agreed with all the other premiers in Canada, the provinces and the territories. He had agreed on the fact that there was a problem with the equalization payments. So we had to do something, and something had been done. It might not be enough for Mr. McGuinty, but something had been done in order to adjust the equalization formula.
Well, Quebec, from what I read, was helped a lot more than Ontario was. And as a result, Mr. McGuinty, I know he did an event with Monsieur Charest very recently. And what I wonder is, do you think, are you concerned that people in Ontario are going to look across to the people of Quebec and say, you know what, you guys got a way better deal than we did, and we're still owed way more money here, and we're mad at you because of that? Are you worried about that?
Yes, I am, because first of all, Quebec is a beneficiary province of the equalization payments, Ontario is not. What does that mean? It means that the economy in Quebec is weaker than the economy in Ontario. And this is a problem in itself. But why did we consider in the past, and do we still consider equalization as a great Canadian value? It is because we believe in a more fair society, in a more just society. And as long as the economy in Quebec will be, I would say, training, will be, not training, but will be behind Ontario's economy. As long as it will be the case, Quebec will be beneficiary of equalization payments, as other provinces are.
But do you think Ontario has a case?
I don't know if Ontario has a case, because what I do know is that there is I would say, a level that is imposed on equalization payments, a top that is imposed on equalization payments, that makes sure that the beneficiary provinces never have a fiscal capacity that is over the non-beneficiary provinces like Ontario.
I understand.
So I'm not sure that Ontario has a very good case on that issue, but I understand the preoccupation of Ontarians. But at the same time, Ontario has been driving for years so much the economy in Canada that now Ontario has a share to do concerning the redistribution of wealth in Canada. It might be too much for Ontarians, but it is part of what it is to be Canadian at the same time.
Here's something Don McPherson wrote in one of your local newspapers in Quebec, the Gazette. Jean Charest might be less concerned with influencing the election results than using the federal campaign to establish his independence from Ottawa and strengthen his credentials as a nationalist and a defender of Quebec's interests. Those have been Charest's weaknesses since he was conscripted from federal politics in 1998 as leader of the Quebec Liberal Party to save Canada from Lucien Bouchard. Along with complaining about the Conservatives' cuts to culture programs, Charest has called for provincial government control over public spending and policy on culture. And the former separatist fighter does not shy away from the term cultural sovereignty, coined in the mid-1970s by Liberal Premier Robert Bourassa to describe his position. Do you think that's accurate?
Well, what is not accurate is that it's not something that we are doing only to make sure that we influence the federal election, or only because we feel that electorally speaking we should do that. This is something that we feel very strongly. We feel very strongly that we should defend Quebec's interest. We feel very strongly that it is in the interest of Quebec and Quebecers that we have a better control over culture, because through culture we could express Quebec's identity. So this is something that we feel very strongly about. And the fact is that what is called nationalist is simply someone who defends Quebec's interests.
That's it?
Simply
doesn't
that.
go beyond that.
No, simply that. Quebec, and what we want is Quebec to be reinforced within Canada. And I would like to see someone against that idea. At the same time, I'm telling you that we are ready to be part of Canada, that we want to be part of Canada, but that we want Quebec to be reinforced within this country. Who could be against that?
Monsieur Charest and the current Prime Minister Stephen Harper have had a, most of the time, good, close relationship. And Mr. Harper knows that if he wants a majority, it has to come through, probably has to come through Quebec. And yet Charest was very critical of the Conservative cuts on the arts programming. Why did he do that?
That's because we don't think that the federal government took the right decision with regards to these cuts. These cuts are affecting something that is fundamental for Quebecers, and that is culture.
But it could also hurt Mr. Harper's chance to get a majority. Would Mr. Charest want to do that?
What Mr. Charest wants to do is that everyone knows where our government stands on those questions. We are not asking ourselves, are we going to help Mr. Harper, Mr. Dion, or anyone else? We are asking ourselves, what should we do in order to make sure that on the 15th of October, anyone in Canada knows where our government stands on these issues.
Okay, we're not at the 15th of October yet, but I do want to find out where your government stands vis-a-vis the Conservative Party. It seems to me there are a lot of links, a lot of people working, both for Quebec Liberals and federal Conservatives. Would you agree with that?
It is true. And
why so much simpatico between these two parties?
well, I would say the same about the Liberal Party of Quebec and the Liberal Party of Canada. That's the same thing. I know many organizers who individually, it's an individual decision.
But it makes sense for Liberals to help Liberals. Some people would say it doesn't make so much sense for provincial Liberals to help federal Conservatives.
Not in Quebec, not in Quebec, because since the 60s, it's very special. Huh? It's a
distinct society, eh?
it is. Since the 60s, since Jean Lesage, the Quebec Liberal Party is, in fact, independent from any political party at the federal level. And I would tell you that in my case, it helps me. That independence helps me as minister responsible for intergovernmental affairs.
Are you campaigning in this election?
No, I'm not.
Not for anybody?
No, and I'm not member of any federal party either.
Do you care who wins?
No.
Don't have a view on it.
A view, yes, I do have a view.
So tell me your view.
Well, about the federal election?
Yeah.
Well, this is a personal view.
Sure.
I'm watching it. I'm watching it as any citizen does. But what I have in mind is that whatever the government that will be elected on the 14th of October, I will have to deal with that government and get the best for Canada.
Right,
for
that's your
Quebec
job.
from that government.
But who are you going to vote for?
Job. Well, this is something that is confidential.
You don't mind my asking, do you?
I don't mind, but...
But you're not going to tell me.
No, I'm sure that you did not expect me to answer you.
Well, hope springs eternal, as we say. What do you think the continued presence of the Bloc Québécois in Ottawa does for Quebec?
Well, I think that Quebecers should stop supporting the Bloc Québécois as they are doing, because my view is that they are supporting a party that is finally a sovereignist party. And that is what makes me sad, because the Bloc Québécois does not talk very much about sovereignty. During this campaign, they do not talk very much about sovereignty. But it is still their main goal. And it would be good that Quebecers stop supporting a party that has as a goal the idea of in fact, dismantling Canada. And this is something that is against my philosophy. If I may tell you about my vote on the 14th, yeah, there is one party that I will not vote for, and it's the Bloc Québécois.
NDP, might you vote for them? I can't narrow you down some more.
No.
Let me ask you one more question. Because we see here in Ontario, Stéphane Dion is from Quebec, and yet he is not popular in his home province. We see Stephen Harper, born in Toronto, now from out west, and yet his party, for much of this campaign, I think, has been the second, and at times very competitive with the BQ for first place in Quebec. What is the appeal among Quebecers for Stephen Harper?
Well, it's probably related to, for a part, to that sensitivity that he showed on different occasions towards Quebec identity. And here I'm referring to that motion of the House of Commons recognizing that the Québécois form a nation within a united Canada. This is something that Quebecers appreciated very much. I know that most Quebecers want to see signs of a better respect for what they are, collectively speaking, in this country. And Mr. Harper did that move courageously, because it was quite courageous at that time when he did it. Did that move, and this is something that probably some Quebecers like in him. But at the same time, we'll see on the 14th if that support that he got from Quebecers is still there. I don't know how the vote is going to play.
But you think his popularity stems from that resolution more than anything else?
No, different things. But I know where it started, though. It started from a speech
in Buckingham
that he gave
December
in 2005.
19th. Yep, I remember the one.
And that speech where he talked about fiscal imbalance, a place for Quebec at UNESCO, also the limitation of the federal spending power, was the main factor that explained his victory in 2006, a few weeks later. So you see that for Quebecers, it is still something that is important, even if in the polls it does not show. Most Quebecers say, well, our preoccupation is economy, it's something else. And then comes the federal-provincial relation that comes at the bottom. But I know that in the subconscious, I know that most Quebecers still consider that question of federal-provincial relations as being of prime importance.
Gotcha. Mr. Pelletier, thank you very much for visiting us at TVO, and I hope you had a good time in the province of Ontario.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Merci beaucoup.